Always forced to be the family slave since childhood, my wife, parents, and brother skipped my birthday at the last minute. Oh, we got invited to a party. Having so much fun. I forgot your birthday. My wife laughed. I vowed never to see my family again. But 3 years later. Look, I'm not saying I was born with a kick me sign taped to my back, but I'm also not saying the universe didn't have a weird sense of humor when it shipped me to the Reed family. My name's Noah Reed. I'm 30 years old, and if there was ever a professional certification for being a doormat with a pulse, I'd have a framed diploma hanging in my non-existent office. Actually, scratch that. I'd probably let my brother use it as a coaster for his overpriced whiskey. Let me paint you a picture of the Reed family dynasty, and I use that term as loosely as my father uses the word proud when describing me. At the top of this dysfunctional food chain sits my dad, Richard Reed, a man so emotionally constipated that I'm pretty sure he thinks feelings are a line item you can deduct from your taxes. He's corporate through and through, the kind of guy who wears a three-piece suit to backyard barbecues and probably irons his pajamas. I've seen him cry exactly once, and that was when the stock market took a dive in 2008. Not at my high school graduation. Not when I got married. The Dow Jones, people. That's what cracked the vault. Then there's my mother, Martha Reed, who treats social status like it's oxygen and she's got asthma. The woman can organize a charity luncheon faster than most people can order pizza, and she knows exactly which fork to use for every possible scenario, including, I suspect, stabbing someone who uses the wrong one. Her entire existence revolves around what the neighbors think, what her book club thinks, and whether her latest Instagram post of her rustic farmhouse kitchen, spoiler, we live in the suburbs, got enough likes. I'm pretty sure she measures her self-worth in engagement rates. And then there's Eli. Oh, Eli, my younger brother, the golden retriever of the family, and I mean that in the most literal sense. He's handsome in that annoying, effortless way that makes you want to punch a wall. He's never met a responsibility he couldn't dodge, and he has the attention span of a goldfish on Red Bull. If privilege was a person, it would be Eli, sitting on a yacht he didn't pay for, drinking champagne he can't pronounce, while someone else, spoiler alert, it's me, handles his tax returns because he thinks a W-2 is a droid from Star Wars. Growing up in the Reed household was like being cast in a sitcom where I was the laugh track, not the star. When we were kids, Eli got birthday parties that looked like Pinterest threw up glitter and joy all over our backyard. We're talking magicians, pony rides, bounce houses, the works. Parents from 3 zip codes over would show up with presents wrapped in paper that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. Meanwhile, my birthdays? Let's just say they were more of a here's a cupcake, now go help your father install that ceiling fan kind of vibe. I spent my 7th birthday holding a flashlight in a crawl space while my dad cursed at electrical wiring. Happy birthday to me, I guess. The pattern didn't exactly break as we got older. It calcified like plaque in an artery. Eli got a car for his 16th birthday, a cherry red convertible that he immediately crashed into a mailbox because he was too busy taking selfies to notice stop signs exist. Did he get in trouble? Nah. Dad just sighed, called the insurance company, and bought him another one. I got a bike, a used bike, that I had to assemble myself, from a box, with missing parts. I'm pretty sure one of the wheels was a Pentagon. Fast forward to adulthood, and you'd think things would change, right? You'd think a grown man with his own job, his own life, his own identity, would be free from the gravitational pull of family dysfunction. Wrong. So incredibly wrong. I became the family's unpaid handyman, therapist, accountant, IT department, and emotional support animal all rolled into one exhausted package. My dad's kitchen sink springs a leak at 2 in the morning. I'm getting a call. My mom's laptop won't connect to Wi-Fi because she accidentally turned off the router again. Guess who's driving across town? Eli needs someone to proofread his resume for the 15th job he's going to bomb the interview for. You guessed it, yours truly. And what did I get in return for this decades-long marathon of servitude? Gratitude? Money? Thanks, Noah. You're literally holding this family together with duct tape and denial. Nope. I got paid in the world's most useless currency, empty compliments. You're such a good son, my mom would say, patting my hand like I was a golden retriever who'd just fetched the newspaper. We couldn't do this without you, my dad would mutter, already walking away before the sentence finished. And Eli? Eli would just grin and say, "You're the best, bro," while handing me another problem to solve, like I was some kind of human vending machine for solutions. If loyalty had a union, I'd be the mascot. Hell, I'd be on the poster. They'd use my face to guilt-trip other people into staying in toxic situations. Be like Noah, the caption would read. Devoted to a fault. Literally. So when I finally got married to Rachel, my college sweetheart, the girl I thought was going to be my escape hatch from this circus, I genuinely believed things would change. I thought, okay, Noah, new chapter. You're building your own family now. You're going to have someone who actually sees you, appreciates you, prioritizes you. I had this whole fantasy cooked up where Rachel and I would move to a little house with a white fence, maybe get a dog, host dinner parties where people actually remembered my name. I was going to be a husband, not a butler. A partner, not a problem solver. Yeah, right. Turns out I didn't escape anything. I just traded one set of bosses for another, swapped one gilded cage for a slightly different one with better wallpaper. Because here's the thing nobody tells you about marrying someone who grew up in the same social circle as your family. They've been taking notes. They've learned all the plays. They know exactly which buttons to push, which guilt trips work, and how to make you feel like you're crazy for expecting the bare minimum. Rachel fit into my family like a puzzle piece I didn't know was missing, which should have been my first, second, and third red flag all rolled into a banner I could have seen from space. But did I see it? Nope. I was too busy being the good son, the good brother, and now the good husband, because that's what Noah Reed does. Noah Reed shows up. Noah Reed fixes things. Noah Reed makes everyone else's life easier while his own crumbles like a stale cookie nobody wanted in the first place. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how I spent the first 30 years of my life. As the family butler, the designated fixer, the guy everyone forgot about until they needed something. Spoiler alert. It doesn't get better before it gets worse. Rachel Matthews. Well, Rachel Reed after we got married, though she kept her maiden name on social media because it has better SEO, is the kind of woman who walks into a room and immediately becomes its center of gravity. I'm not even exaggerating. She's got this thing about her, this magnetic pull that makes people lean in when she talks, laugh at her jokes even when they're not that funny, and generally treat her like she's the main character in everyone's story. And look, I get it. She's objectively gorgeous. We're talking the kind of pretty that makes strangers do double takes and walk into parking meters. Long dark hair that somehow always looks professionally styled even when she claims she just woke up like this. Green eyes that could sell ice to penguins, and a smile that belonged on toothpaste commercials. She knew it, too. Oh, she absolutely knew it. When we met in college, I was a sophomore struggling through an economics class I had no business taking. And she was the girl everyone wanted to sit next to. Not because she was smart, though she was, but because being associated with Rachel Matthews gave you social currency. It was like carrying around a black card, except instead of unlimited spending, you got unlimited invitations to parties you'd never be cool enough to attend on your own. I still don't know what she saw in me back then. I was average looking on a good day, perpetually tired from working 2 part-time jobs to afford textbooks. And my idea of a wild Friday night was getting through my calculus homework without crying. But somehow, miraculously, she picked me. We started dating, and for a while, a glorious, naive while, I thought I'd won the lottery. Here's what I didn't realize at the time. Rachel didn't fall in love with me. She fell in love with the idea of someone who would worship her without requiring much maintenance in return. I was the perfect accessory, the reliable boyfriend who'd carry her books, drive her to parties, take cute couple photos for her Instagram, and never complain when she spent 3 hours getting ready while I sat in the car listening to true crime podcasts. I was so busy feeling grateful that someone like her would date someone like me that I completely missed the neon sign spelling out, "This is a bad idea," in letters the size of billboards. The really tragic part? She grew up in the same social circle as my family. Her parents knew my parents from the country club, that godforsaken place where people pay thousands of dollars annually to eat mediocre salmon and pretend they enjoy golf. Rachel and Eli had actually gone to the same private high school, which meant they had this shared language of inside jokes and remember whens that I was permanently excluded from because I'd gone to public school like a peasant. My family absolutely adored her from day one. My mom practically threw a parade when I brought Rachel home for the first time. She's so refined. my mother gushed, which was code for she knows which silver spoon to use. My dad approved because Rachel's father was some big-shot attorney, and networking is basically my dad's love language. And Eli? Eli thought she was hilarious because she could match him joke for joke, insult for insult, and had a laugh that could shatter wine glasses in a 3-block radius. That laugh. God, that laugh. It wasn't a delicate giggle or a cute chuckle. It was a full-body, earthquake-inducing cackle that announced her presence before she even entered a room. At family dinners, she and my mother would gossip like they were auditioning for a reality show, trading stories about people I'd never met and didn't care about, their laughter bouncing off the walls while I sat there moving food around my plate like a kid who'd been grounded. My dad would nod approvingly, probably thinking about how this alliance would strengthen the family's social standing or whatever Machiavellian nonsense he obsessed over. And Eli would join in, cracking jokes at my expense while Rachel laughed along, never once thinking to defend me or even acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't cool to roast her husband like he was a Comedy Central special. In the early years of our marriage, I genuinely thought we were solid. I really did. I'd come home from work. Back when I was still trying to climb the ladder at my dad's company, a soul-crushing endeavor that deserves its own therapy session, and I'd cook dinner. Not fancy stuff, but decent meals. Pasta with homemade sauce, grilled chicken with vegetables, occasionally attempting something ambitious like risotto that would inevitably turn into expensive rice porridge. I'd set the table, light candles, the whole 9 yards. And Rachel would come home, take a picture of the setup, post it on Instagram with some caption like, "Dinner goals, smiling face with hard eye sparkles," and rack up hundreds of likes from people who thought she'd cooked it herself. Did she mention me? Tag me? Acknowledge that I existed? Not once. I was the ghost chef, the invisible husband, the man behind the curtain who everyone forgot to thank when the show ended. My therapist, and by therapist, I mean the ungodly hours I spent Googling things like, "Why doesn't my wife appreciate me?" at 2 in the morning, would probably call it invisible husband syndrome. I'd plan surprise date nights, book reservations at restaurants we couldn't really afford, buy her flowers for no reason other than it was Tuesday, and she'd post about all of it online like it was content she'd generated herself. Treated myself to a spa day, her caption would read, conveniently omitting that I'd paid for it, and spent that same day cleaning out the gutters. Best date night. Another post proclaimed, showing her dressed to the nines while I was cropped out of the photo like a photobombing stranger. But I kept giving. That's what I did, what I'd always done, because giving was the only language I spoke fluently. I paid the bills, all of them. Rent, utilities, her car payment, her credit card debt that mysteriously grew every month like some kind of financial cancer. I mowed the lawn every Saturday, even though we lived in a rental and technically the landlord was supposed to handle it. I fixed light bulbs, unclogged drains, assembled furniture from boxes with instructions written in what I can only assume was ancient hieroglyphics. I endured family dinners where my brother would call me Mr. Errand Boy, while Rachel laughed, actually laughed, like it was the funniest thing she'd heard all week. "He's not wrong," she'd say, nudging me with her elbow like we were in on the joke together, except I was the joke, and she was the comedian getting applause. I'd smile through it all, play along, pretend it didn't bother me that my own wife treated me like a particularly useful piece of furniture. A couch that could cook, maybe. An ottoman that paid taxes. I told myself it would get better, that we were just going through a rough patch, that all marriages required sacrifice and compromise. What I didn't realize was that I was the only one sacrificing anything, and the compromise was me slowly erasing myself until there was nothing left but a ghost in a husband costume. All I wanted, and I mean this with every exhausted fiber of my being, was one day where I felt seen. One day where Rachel looked at me like I was a person and not a personal assistant she'd accidentally married. One day where my family acknowledged that maybe, just maybe, I deserved to be celebrated instead of utilized. Was that too much to ask? Apparently yes, because the universe had other plans, and those plans involved my 30th birthday becoming the punchline to a joke I didn't know I was part of until it was way too late. I woke up on my 30th birthday feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Actual, genuine optimism. I know, rookie mistake. Optimism and the Reed family go together like pineapple on pizza, which is to say some people swear by it, but most rational humans know it's a crime against nature. But there I was, opening my eyes to sunlight streaming through the bedroom window, thinking maybe, just maybe, this year would be different. 30 felt like a milestone, you know? Like the universe owed me something for surviving 3 decades of being everyone's backup dancer. I wasn't expecting a parade or anything, though honestly, after 30 years of service, a small marching band wouldn't have been unreasonable, but I figured at minimum I'd get acknowledged. A card, a cupcake, literally anything that proved I existed as more than a household appliance. Rachel was already awake when I shuffled into the kitchen, which should have been my first clue that something was off because that woman treated mornings like they were personally offensive to her. She usually rolled out of bed around 10, complained about being tired despite sleeping 11 hours, and then spent 45 minutes deciding which athleisure outfit to wear while not exercising. But that morning, she was up, dressed, and smiling at me in a way that made my stupid, hopeful heart do a little flip. "Morning, babe," she said, and I swear there was something conspiratorial in her voice, like she was holding on to a secret she couldn't wait to reveal. "Don't make any plans tonight, okay? I've got something special planned." Something special. Those 2 words carried me through the entire day like a life raft in an ocean of mundane responsibilities. I went to work, still grinding away at my dad's company, still being the only person who actually showed up on time. And every email I answered, every spreadsheet I updated, every tedious meeting I sat through, I kept thinking about those words. Something special. Maybe she'd actually remembered. Maybe she'd planned a surprise party with my friends, assuming I still had friends after years of canceling plans to fix my family's problems. Maybe she'd cooked dinner, which would have been a miracle on par with loaves and fishes considering her idea of cooking was reheating takeout. Maybe, just maybe, I'd finally get to feel like I mattered. By the time I got home around 6, I was practically vibrating with anticipation. I'd stopped at the store on the way and grabbed ingredients for a nice dinner. Nothing fancy, just some good steaks, potatoes, the fixings for a salad, a decent bottle of wine. I figured even if Rachel had something planned, we'd need to eat, and I might as well contribute since that's basically my entire personality at this point. I set everything up in the kitchen, changed into a nicer shirt, and waited. The house was weirdly quiet. No decorations, no balloons, no streamers, no hand-drawn happy birthday banner made by someone who cared enough to spend 5 minutes with a Sharpie. Just silence and the hum of the refrigerator, which honestly felt like a metaphor for my entire existence. 7 o'clock rolled around, then 7:30, then 8. I texted Rachel, trying to keep it casual, trying not to sound like a desperate kid waiting to be picked up from soccer practice after everyone else had already gone home. "Hey, what time should I be ready?" Smiling face with smiling eyes. I even included a smiley emoji, which physically hurt to type because I'm a grown man and emojis make me feel like I'm trying too hard. But I wanted to seem upbeat and not at all like someone who was starting to suspect he'd been forgotten again. The response came 20 minutes later. 20 minutes. I watched those 3 little dots appear and disappear about 6 times before the message finally came through, and when it did, I felt something inside me crack like ice on a frozen lake. "Oh shoot, forgot to tell you, your mom and dad invited me and Eli to a party. Some fancy charity thing at the club. Black tie event. I'll bring you cake tomorrow, promise." Face blowing a kiss. I read that message 3 times, each read-through adding another layer of what I can only describe as cartoonish disbelief. They'd all gone. Together. To a party. On my birthday. Without me. My wife, my parents, my brother. The entire starting lineup of people who were supposed to give a damn about my existence had dressed up in their finest clothes and gone to a party at the country club, and not one of them thought to mention it to me. Not one of them considered that maybe, possibly, the birthday boy should be invited to literally anything happening on his birthday. And Rachel's response? The verbal equivalent of patting me on the head and promising a treat later like I was a dog who'd been good. About staying home alone. I sat on the couch for a solid 10 minutes, just staring at my phone, waiting for the punchline. Surely this was a joke, right? Some elaborate setup for a surprise that would make sense later? Any second now, they'd all burst through the door yelling surprise, and I'd laugh at how gullible I'd been, how I'd actually believe they could forget me on my 30th birthday. Any second now. Any second. The seconds turned into minutes, and the minutes confirmed what I already knew deep down. This wasn't a joke. This was just my life, presented in its purest, most distilled form. Milo, my golden retriever, the only family member who'd never forgotten my birthday, because dogs don't know what birthdays are and love you unconditionally regardless, patted over and put his head on my knee. He looked up at me with those big brown eyes that somehow conveyed both sympathy and confusion, like he couldn't understand why I was sitting in the dark when there were perfectly good tennis balls that needed throwing. Bro, this is sad. His expression seemed to say, and honestly, he wasn't wrong. I scratched behind his ears and tried to convince myself this was fine, totally fine, just another day in the Reed family saga. Around 10 o'clock, my phone buzzed with an incoming photo. I shouldn't have looked. I absolutely should not have looked. But of course I did, because I'm apparently a masochist who enjoys emotional self-harm. It was a selfie from Rachel, taken at the country club, and she looked absolutely stunning in a red dress I'd never seen before, which meant she'd gone shopping and somehow forgot to mention it. She was grinning like she'd just won the lottery, holding a champagne flute that probably cost more than my entire birthday dinner still sitting untouched in the kitchen. Standing next to her, also grinning, were my mom in her pearls and my dad in a tuxedo, looking more relaxed than I'd seen him in months. And there, in the background, slightly out of focus but definitely identifiable, was Eli chatting up some blonde who was way out of his league. The caption read, "Having so much fun at this charity gala. Totally forgot it was Noah's birthday, face with tears of joy. Oops. Love you, babe." She put a laughing emoji. A laughing emoji. Like forgetting your husband's 30th birthday was a hilarious mix-up, a silly little hoopsie-daisy that we'd all laugh about later over brunch. And she'd posted it publicly, which meant approximately 300 people now knew that Rachel Reed had forgotten her husband existed on the one day a year where forgetting someone is literally the worst thing you can do. I laughed. I actually laughed out loud, sitting there in the dark with my dog in my disappointment, and it was the kind of laugh that sounds like something dying. You know that noise a vacuum cleaner makes right before it gives up completely? That rattling, wheezing sound that tells you it's about to become an expensive paperweight. That's what came out of my mouth. Milo tilted his head, concerned, probably wondering if he should call 911 or if I'd just completely lost my mind. Honestly, it could have gone either way. Here's the thing about breaking points that nobody tells you. They're not loud. They don't come with explosions or dramatic music or the sound of plates shattering against walls like you see in movies. There's no moment where you stand up, flip a table, and deliver some epic monologue about how you've been wronged while everyone watches in stunned silence. Real breaking points are quiet. They're the sound of a candle being blown out at midnight. They're the absence of noise where celebration should be. They're sitting in your kitchen at 10:30 on a Thursday night, staring at a dinner you cooked for 6 people who never showed up, and feeling something inside you just stop. I didn't cry. I think I was beyond crying at that point, like I'd exceeded my lifetime quota of tears and my body had just given up on producing them. I didn't yell or punch anything or do whatever it is people do when they're having an emotional breakdown. I just sat there at the dining table I'd set hours earlier, looking at the 6 place settings I'd arranged like some kind of optimistic idiot. 6 plates, 6 sets of silverware, 6 wine glasses, 6 napkins folded into those fancy triangles I'd learned from a YouTube video because I wanted everything to be perfect. I'd even put out the good tablecloth, the one we usually reserved for Thanksgiving, because I thought my 30th birthday warranted something special. The steaks had gone cold hours ago, congealing in their own juices on the serving platter. The salad had wilted into a sad pile of brown lettuce. The potatoes sat there like accusations. The wine remained unopened because apparently drinking alone on your forgotten birthday crosses some kind of line from pathetic into concerning, and I wasn't quite ready to take that leap yet. Milo had given up on me around 9:30 and gone to his bed in the corner, probably exhausted from trying to figure out why his human was acting like a malfunctioning robot. Even the dog knew something was fundamentally broken about this situation, and dogs think eating garbage is a reasonable life choice. That's how bad it was. I'd managed to depress a golden retriever, an animal species genetically engineered to be happy about literally everything. I picked up my phone and looked at Rachel's post again, which was like picking at a scab, except the scab was my entire sense of self-worth. The comments had started rolling in. "Gorgeous," someone wrote. "You look amazing," said another. "Such a fun night," chimed in a third. My mother-in-law had commented with a string of heart emojis. My own mother had replied with such a lovely evening, complete with a champagne glass emoji, which meant she'd taken the time to find the right emoji while somehow not finding the time to remember her oldest son's birthday. Eli had tagged himself in the photo and added, "Read family representing," because of course he had. Not a single person in those comments had said, "Hey, wait, isn't it Noah's birthday?" Not one. It was like I existed in some parallel dimension where I could see everyone else, but nobody could see me, like I was the ghost of husbands past haunting my own life. The realization hit me somewhere around 11 o'clock, settling into my bones like cold water. I wasn't a son or a brother or a husband to these people. I was a service. I was the emergency contact they called when something broke. I was the guy who showed up with tools and solutions and the ability to make problems disappear without complaining too much. I was a handyman, a fixer, a mobile support system that required no maintenance and apparently no celebration. You don't throw birthday parties for your dishwasher. You don't celebrate your garbage disposal's anniversary. You just use them when you need them and forget they exist the rest of the time. And maybe once a year you remember to feel vaguely grateful that they're still functioning. 30 years. I'd given these people 30 years of showing up, helping out, being reliable, being the good son and the good brother and the good husband. And what did I have to show for it? A cold steak dinner and a text message that said, "Oops." Like forgetting me was a charming personality quirk instead of a pattern of behavior that had been repeating itself since I was old enough to hold a flashlight in a crawl space. At 11:45, I got up and started putting the food away because that's what I do. I clean up messes, even the emotional ones. I scraped the steaks into Milo's bowl because at least someone would appreciate them, and watching him devour them with the enthusiasm of someone who actually gave a damn about my efforts made me feel marginally less pathetic. I washed the dishes, folded the tablecloth, put away the wine glasses, and transformed the scene of my disappointing birthday back into a regular kitchen where nothing sad had happened. Magic. By the time I was done, it was 11:58, which meant I had approximately 2 minutes left of being 29, 2 minutes left of being able to say, well, at least this year can't get worse. I opened the pantry and stared at its contents like I was hoping the meaning of life would be hiding behind the cereal boxes. We didn't have cake. We didn't have cupcakes. We didn't even have those sad little Hostess things you buy at gas stations when you're trying to be celebratory on a budget. What we did have was bread, and honestly, at that point bread was going to have to be enough because the universe clearly wasn't interested in giving me anything better. I took out 2 slices of white bread, the cheap stuff, the kind that tastes like air and regret, and found a single birthday candle in the junk drawer, left over from someone else's celebration. I put the bread on a plate, stuck the candle in the center like I was planting a flag on the saddest mountain ever climbed, and lit it with a lighter I kept around for the grill I never got to use because I was always too busy fixing other people's problems to cook for myself. The flame flickered in the dark kitchen, casting weird shadows on the walls, and I watched it dance for a moment while the clock on the microwave ticked over to midnight. "Happy birthday, champ," I whispered to myself, my voice barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator. It felt like speaking at a funeral, which I guess it was in a way. I was mourning the death of whatever hope I'd been carrying around that things would change, that I'd eventually get what I deserved for being loyal and reliable and good. I was burying the version of myself that still believed effort equaled reward, that showing up meant being seen, that loving people meant they'd love you back the same way. I blew out the candle, and in that moment, that exact, precise, crystalline moment, something fundamental shifted inside me. It wasn't dramatic. There was no revelation accompanied by choir music or sudden clarity that hit like lightning. It was quieter than that, more permanent. It was the sound of a door closing that I'd been trying to keep open for 3 decades. It was the feeling of a weight lifting that I didn't know I'd been carrying. It was the simple, clear, undeniable knowledge that I was done. Done being the family butler. Done being the emergency contact. Done being the punchline. Done being invisible. Done being grateful for scraps of attention from people who should have been grateful for me. Done waiting for them to change when the only person who needed to change was me, and the change I needed was to leave. No shouting. No throwing things. No dramatic exit speeches or burned bridges or final confrontations where I laid out exactly how much they'd hurt me and demanded apologies I'd never get. Just silence and certainty and a piece of bread with a candle in it sitting on a plate in a dark kitchen. That was my breaking point. That was my line in the sand. That was the moment Noah Reed, professional doormat, family handyman, invisible husband, decided to become someone else entirely. I ate the bread. It tasted like cardboard and freedom. Milo looked up from his bed, probably wondering if I'd finally lost it completely, and maybe I had. But for the first time in 30 years, losing it felt exactly like finding myself. Leaving a marriage, a family, and an entire life behind requires a certain amount of planning, especially when you're trying to do it without tipping anyone off that you're about to pull a Houdini. The 2 weeks following my bread candle birthday were possibly the most surreal 14 days of my existence. Like I was living in one of those heist movies where the crew has to act normal while secretly plotting the crime of the century. Except my crime was just wanting to exist somewhere that didn't treat me like a particularly useful appliance. Rachel came home around 2 in the morning on my actual birthday, stumbling through the door in her fancy red dress with makeup smeared under her eyes and smelling like a champagne factory had exploded. She found me on the couch, still awake because sleep felt impossible when your entire worldview had just been rearranged like furniture in a room you thought you knew. "Babe," she slurred, kicking off her heels and nearly taking out a lamp in the process. "You should have been there. It was amazing. Your mom says hi, by the way. Oh, and I got you cake." She held up a styrofoam container with what I assume was supposed to be cake, but looked more like it had been through a war. "The waiter gave it to me for free because I told him it was your birthday. Isn't that sweet?" "Super sweet," I said, and my voice must have sounded normal enough because she didn't notice anything wrong. That's when I realized I could have told her I was planning to fake my own death and move to Argentina, and she probably would have said, "That's nice, babe," and scrolled through her phone. She passed out 30 seconds later, still wearing the dress, snoring like a chainsaw cutting through the silence of my dying marriage. The next morning, I started planning. Step 1 was figuring out where the hell I was going, because running away is significantly less dramatic when you don't actually have anywhere to run to. I scrolled through my contacts. And Jesus, when did my contact list become so depressing? It was basically just family members, Rachel's friends who I'd never actually had a real conversation with, and a handful of people from college I hadn't spoken to in years because I'd been too busy being everyone's handyman to maintain actual friendships. But then I found it. Marcus Chun, my old roommate from sophomore year, back when I still had a personality and interests beyond fixing other people's problems. Marcus and I had been tight in college, the kind of friends who stayed up until 4 in the morning arguing about whether hot dogs were sandwiches and if cereal counted as soup. He'd gone on to start a tech repair shop out in Colorado, Denver specifically, and we'd kept in vague touch through the occasional happy birthday text and ironic meme exchange. I hadn't seen him in person in probably 5 years, but when I called him at 7 in the morning Mountain Time because I'd forgotten about time zones, he answered like we'd just talked yesterday. "Noah Reed," he said, and I could hear the grin in his voice. To what do I owe the pleasure of a call before my first cup of coffee? Did somebody die? Or did you finally realize your life is a tragedy? Option B, I said. I need a job and a place to crash. Possibly immediately. Definitely within 2 weeks. There was a pause, and then Marcus said, "You look like a man fresh out of a hostage situation," which made no sense because we were on the phone and he couldn't see me, but somehow it was exactly the right thing to say. "Close enough," I replied, and just like that, I had an escape plan. Marcus needed someone to run operations at his shop. Apparently, he was great at fixing computers, but terrible at things like showing up on time and remembering to pay the electric bill. The job paid decent, came with a small apartment above the shop that was currently being used for storage, and most importantly, it was 1,700 miles away from everyone who'd spent 30 years forgetting I existed. It was perfect. It was terrifying. It was happening. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in lying by omission. I went to work at my dad's company like normal, pushing papers and fixing the constant stream of problems that apparently only I knew how to solve, while secretly copying all my personal files onto a flash drive and deleting every trace of my actual work from the system. Let them figure out how to run their invoicing software without me. I went to family dinners and nodded along while my mom complained about the caterer at some fundraiser and Eli bragged about his latest failed business venture. I came home to Rachel and listened to her talk about her day, her friends, her problems, her everything, while she asked me exactly 0 questions about mine. It was remarkably easy to pretend everything was normal because everything was normal. I just finally realized that normal was killing me. I sold my car, a 10-year-old Honda that I'd maintained meticulously because that's what I did with everything in my life. Some college kid bought it off Craigslist for $3,000 cash, and I felt weirdly emotional watching him drive away in it, like I was saying goodbye to the last piece of the old Noah. I opened a new bank account at a different bank and slowly transferred money over in amounts small enough that Rachel wouldn't notice, which wasn't hard because she never looked at our finances anyway. I packed one suitcase, just one, because I wanted to travel light, and also because most of my stuff was either broken from lending it to family members or so tied to memories I wanted to forget that leaving it behind felt therapeutic. The night before I left, I cooked dinner one last time. Spaghetti carbonara, Rachel's favorite, because even though I was leaving her, I wasn't a complete monster. She ate it while watching TikToks, laughing at videos I couldn't see, existing in my presence without actually acknowledging my existence. It was like being a ghost, except ghosts usually get more attention. After she went to bed, I sat down and wrote the note. I must have started it 20 different times, trying to find the right words to explain 3 decades of feeling invisible, but eventually I realized there were no right words. So I kept it simple. I stuck it on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a pineapple that Rachel had bought during some girl's trip to Hawaii I'd paid for, but wasn't invited to. The note said, "Since you all forgot me, I'll make it official. I'm gone. Don't worry. I'll send you an invoice for 30 years of unpaid labor." I left at 5 in the morning, before Rachel woke up, before the sun came up, before I could second-guess myself into staying. Milo was the hardest part. I knelt down and hugged him. This perfect dog who'd never asked me for anything except walks and belly rubs, and who loved me unconditionally in a way humans apparently couldn't manage. "Take care of her," I whispered into his fur, even though we both knew he was better at that job than I'd ever been. I'd arranged for a dog walker to come by later that day because I wasn't about to leave him without food, which probably says something about my priorities, but whatever. The bus to Denver left at 6:30 from a station downtown that smelled like regret and industrial cleaner. I'd sold my car, remember, so public transportation it was. I sat in the back with my single suitcase and watched my city disappear through the grimy window. All those familiar buildings and streets where I'd spent my entire life being someone I didn't want to be anymore. My phone buzzed around 9. Rachel, finally awake, finally realizing I wasn't there. I turned it off without reading the message. Whatever she had to say, I'd heard it before in 1,000 different ways. I was overreacting, being dramatic, abandoning my responsibilities. But here's the thing. You can't abandon people who never actually had you in the first place. Marcus picked me up from the Denver bus station 16 hours later, looking exactly the same except with better glasses and a beard that suggested he'd given up on impressing anyone. "You look like hell," he said cheerfully, grabbing my suitcase. "I feel like freedom," I replied, and for the first time in 2 weeks, I smiled and meant it. Turns out, rebuilding your entire personality from scratch is kind of like learning to walk again, except instead of taking your first steps as a toddler, while proud parents cheer you on, you're a 30-year-old man trying to figure out if you actually like coffee or if you've just been drinking it for a decade because someone else told you to. Spoiler alert, I didn't even like coffee. I'd been forcing down bitter bean water every morning for years because Rachel said it made me seem more professional, and I'd just accepted that as fact like some kind of caffeinated sheep. Turns out, when you're not performing for an audience that isn't watching anyway, you can drink whatever the hell you want. Revolutionary concept, I know. The apartment above Marcus's shop was exactly as advertised, small, slightly dusty, and filled with boxes of old computer parts that he swore he'd get around to organizing eventually, which in Marcus speak meant never. It was 1 room plus a bathroom, with a kitchenette that was really just a hot plate and a mini fridge pretending to be a kitchen. The mattress was on the floor because neither of us owned a bed frame, and the only window looked out onto an alley where a stray cat I named Gerald would occasionally scream at 3 in the morning for reasons known only to him. It was, without exaggeration, the most beautiful place I'd ever lived. No memories attached to the walls. No expectations hanging in the air like humidity. No ghost of the person I'd been haunting every corner. Just space, literal and metaphorical. To figure out who Noah Reed actually was when nobody was asking him to be anything else. I started small, because that's what you do when you're basically learning to be human again. First mission, figure out what I actually like to drink in the mornings. I went to a coffee shop, one of those aggressively hip Denver places where everyone has a man bun and opinions about pour-over techniques. And I stood at the counter like an idiot for probably 5 full minutes reading the menu like it was written in Aramaic. The barista, this kid who couldn't have been more than 22 with gauges the size of quarters in his ears, finally took pity on me. First time, he asked, not unkindly. You look lost. I'm trying to figure out what I like, I said, which probably sounded philosophical and weird, but he just nodded like that was a completely normal thing to say at 8 in the morning. Respect, man. Here, try this. He made me something called a honey lavender latte, which sounded like something Rachel would have mocked me for ordering, which meant it was exactly what I needed to try. I took a sip, and holy hell, it was like drinking a hug. Sweet, but not too sweet. Floral, but not like I was eating a bouquet. Warm and comforting in a way that gas station coffee had never been. I went back the next day and ordered the same thing. And the day after that. And the day after that. Until the barista, whose name was apparently Jasper, because of course it was, just started making it when he saw me walk in. Honey lavender for the guy finding himself, he'd announce, and I'd pay my $4.50 and go to work feeling like maybe, possibly, I was starting to become an actual person with actual preferences instead of a collection of other people's expectations wearing a human suit. The haircut was next on my list of small rebellions. I'd been going to the same barber for 8 years, this old-school place near my parents' house where the guy barely spoke and just gave everyone the same conservative cut that made you look like you were about to sell someone insurance. Rachel had insisted on it because it was clean and professional, which I now realize was code for boring and forgettable. So I walked into a different place, a trendy barbershop in downtown Denver with exposed brick walls and a playlist that was actually good, and I told the stylist, a woman with half her head shaved and the other half dyed purple, to do whatever she wanted. Whatever I want, she repeated, like I'd just handed her the nuclear codes. Surprise me. Just make it not scream middle child energy. She laughed so hard she snorted, and then she went to work. 45 minutes later, I walked out with something that actually had style, shorter on the sides, textured on top, the kind of cut that suggested I might have a personality lurking somewhere under the surface. Marcus took one look at me when I got to the shop and said, "Who are you and what did you do with boring Noah?" Which I chose to take as a compliment. But the biggest change, the one that actually required rewiring my entire brain, was learning to say no. Just the word. 2 letters. 1 syllable. Should have been easy, but I'd spent 30 years treating no like a forbidden word, something that would make people angry or disappointed or stop loving me, as if their love was conditional on my constant availability. Marcus became my accidental teacher in this, mostly because he asked me for things constantly and didn't give a damn if I said no. Hey Noah, can you cover the shop tomorrow? I've got a dentist appointment. Old Noah would have said yes immediately, canceled whatever plans he had, and shown up early to make sure everything was perfect. New Noah took a breath and said, "Actually, I can't. I've got plans." I didn't have plans. I was going to sit in my apartment and read a book, which apparently counted as plans now, because reading for pleasure was something I'd forgotten existed during my years of servitude. Marcus just shrugged. Cool, I'll reschedule. And that was it. The world didn't end. He didn't guilt-trip me or make passive-aggressive comments or treat me differently. He just accepted it, like saying no was a normal thing that normal people did. What a concept. Work itself became this weird source of actual satisfaction, which was a new feeling because working at my dad's company had felt like being a hamster on a wheel. Lots of running, no actual progress, and someone watching you the whole time judging your performance. But at Marcus's shop, I was actually good at stuff. Like, objectively, measurably good. I reorganized the entire inventory system in the first month, implemented a scheduling software that cut our booking confusion in half, and apparently had a gift for explaining technical problems to confused customers without making them feel like idiots, which Marcus said was worth its weight in gold because most tech people have the social skills of angry raccoons. 6 months in, Marcus made me operations manager, which came with a raise and the kind of responsibility that felt earned instead of dumped on me. A year after that, the shop had expanded, we'd hired 2 more people, and I was basically running the whole operation while Marcus handled the technical repairs he actually enjoyed. You're shockingly efficient when you're not being yelled at constantly, Marcus observed one day, and he wasn't wrong. Turns out, when you work in an environment where people appreciate you instead of expect you to be psychic about their needs, you actually want to do a good job. But the real gift Colorado gave me wasn't the job or the apartment or the honey lavender lattes or even the haircut that made me look like I might be interesting at parties. It was Marcus and his wife, Leah. Leah was basically Marcus's opposite. Organized where he was chaotic, punctual where he was perpetually late, the kind of person who meal prepped on Sundays and actually used her planner instead of letting it collect dust on a shelf. She was a nurse at Denver General, which meant she'd seen enough human suffering that my sad backstory barely registered as a blip, but she was kind about it anyway. They started inviting me to dinners, casual stuff at first. Hey, we're grilling burgers, want to come over? And I kept waiting for the catch, for the moment when they'd ask me to fix their sink or help them move or do literally anything that required me to be useful instead of just present. But it never came. They just wanted me there. They asked me questions about my day and actually listened to the answers. They remembered things I'd mentioned in passing, like how I'd been wanting to try hiking, and then showed up at my apartment one Saturday with extra boots and a trail map. And then, on my 31st birthday, my first birthday in Denver, my first birthday as the new Noah, they threw me a party. Nothing fancy, just the 3 of us and a few people from the shop. But there was a homemade cake that Leah had baked and actual presents that people had actually put thought into. And when they sang happy birthday, I realized I was crying like an absolute baby and didn't even care. Marcus handed me a beer and said, "You good, man?" And all I could say was, "Yeah, I'm good. I'm really good." And the wildest part? I actually meant it. 3 years is apparently the exact amount of time it takes for a person to completely rebuild themselves from the ground up, because by the time my 33rd birthday rolled around, I barely recognized the guy I'd been when I stepped off that bus in Denver with one suitcase and a personality crisis. That Noah would have spent his birthday waiting for someone else to acknowledge him, hoping for scraps of attention, probably cooking dinner for people who wouldn't show up. This Noah had planned himself a solo camping trip to Rocky Mountain National Park, had already packed his brand new tent that he'd bought with his own money without feeling guilty about it, and was currently sitting in his significantly larger apartment. I'd upgraded 6 months ago to a place with actual rooms and everything. Drinking an espresso from the machine Marcus and Leah had gotten me for Christmas because apparently I was the kind of person who had friends who bought him thoughtful gifts now. The espresso machine was one of those fancy Italian numbers that made sounds like a small spaceship and cost more than my first car, and every time I used it, I felt like I was committing some kind of bourgeois crime. But damn if it didn't make the best coffee I'd ever had. And I'd become the kind of person who could tell the difference between a good pull and a great pull, which would have made college-age Noah laugh until he cried. I was planning my route for the camping trip, spreading maps across my coffee table like I was plotting a heist, when my video doorbell, another recent purchase, because apparently I'd become a responsible adult with home security, buzzed with that distinctive chime that meant someone was at my door. Now, I lived in a building with a security system that required buzzing people in downstairs, which meant whoever was at my actual apartment door had either been let in by another tenant or had somehow bypassed building security, neither of which seemed particularly comforting. I pulled up the camera feed on my phone, expecting to see a delivery guy with a package or maybe my neighbor Dave who occasionally forgot his keys and needed to use my fire escape. And instead I saw something that made my brain completely short-circuit like someone had poured water into my cerebral cortex. My mother stood there, Martha Reed in the flesh, wearing what I recognized as her very serious business outfit. A cream-colored blazer that probably cost more than most people's rent, perfectly pressed pants, the pearl necklace my dad had given her for their 20th anniversary that she wore when she needed to look like old money. Her hair was done, her makeup was immaculate, and she was clutching her designer handbag. That ridiculous Louis Vuitton thing she'd bought to match one that her friend Patricia had, with both hands like it was a life preserver and she was drowning. But it was her face that really got me. Martha Reed did not do panic. Martha Reed did controlled concern strategic worry, carefully calibrated distress designed to manipulate specific emotional responses. But this was actual, genuine panic, the kind that made her eyes too wide and her mouth too tight, and her whole carefully constructed facade crack like old paint. And she wasn't alone, because of course she wasn't. Behind her, looking equally uncomfortable in ways I hadn't seen in years, stood Rachel and Eli. Rachel had aged, not badly, but noticeably. She'd cut her hair shorter, and she wasn't wearing makeup, which was weird because Rachel wore makeup to take out the trash. She looked tired in that bone-deep way that suggested she hadn't slept properly in months, and her clothes, while still nice, had that slightly worn quality that came from being worn too many times without replacement. Eli looked even worse, if I'm being honest. My brother, who'd spent his entire life coasting on looks and charm, had developed stress lines around his eyes and mouth that made him look 10 years older than he actually was. His shirt was wrinkled. Eli, Mr. I only wear things that cost 3 figures, was wearing a wrinkled shirt, and he kept shifting his weight from foot to foot like a kid who needed to pee but was too afraid to ask. I stared at my phone screen for a solid 30 seconds, watching this bizarre tableau of my former life standing on my doorstep 1,700 miles from where they should be, trying to process what the hell was happening. Part of me wanted to just not answer, to pretend I wasn't home, to let them stand there until they gave up and left. But curiosity is a powerful drug, and also I'm apparently still enough of a people pleaser that even after 3 years of therapy. Yeah, I'd started actual therapy, with an actual therapist who wasn't Google, and it was amazing. I couldn't quite bring myself to leave my elderly mother standing in a hallway, regardless of how many birthdays she'd forgotten. I opened the door and leaned against the frame, trying to project the energy of someone who was mildly inconvenienced rather than internally screaming. Well, I said, proud of how steady my voice sounded, this is unexpected. My mom's face did something complicated, cycling through relief and guilt, and something that might have been actual emotion before settling on her default setting of controlled urgency. Noah, thank God you're okay. She moved like she was going to hug me, and I took a step back, holding up one hand in the universal gesture for absolutely not. Well, I wasn't dead, I said, but thanks for checking 3 years late. Really appreciate the concern. The sarcasm was thick enough to spread on toast, but apparently my family's ability to miss social cues had not diminished with time. We've been trying to find you. Eli jumped in, and wow, his voice had taken on this whiny quality I didn't remember, like he'd been practicing his victim voice for a talent show. You disappeared, man. Just gone. No forwarding address, no phone number, nothing. Yeah, that was kind of the point, I replied, still not moving from my position blocking the doorway. It's called leaving. People do it when they're tired of being forgotten. I looked at Rachel, who was staring at her shoes like they contained the secrets of the universe. Nice to see you too, Rachel. Love what you've done with your hair. Very I've given up, but in a stylish way. She flinched, which gave me more satisfaction than it probably should have. But I'm only human, and I've earned a little pettiness. Noah, she started, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. Can we please come in? We need to talk to you. It's important. Everything's always important when you need something, I observed. But I stepped aside anyway, because apparently 3 years of personal growth hadn't completely eliminated my inability to turn away people I used to care about. They filed into my apartment like refugees entering a safe zone, and I watched their eyes take in my space. The decent furniture I'd bought myself, the framed art on the walls that I'd chosen because I liked it not because it matched a color scheme, the espresso machine gleaming on the counter like a chrome monument to my independence. The camping gear spread across the coffee table advertising the fact that I had plans and a life that didn't include them. Nice place, my mom said, and there was genuine surprise in her voice, like she'd expected to find me living in squalor as punishment for abandoning the family. You've done well for yourself. Turns out I'm shockingly competent when I'm not spending all my time and energy being everyone's unpaid servant, I said cheerfully, moving to lean against my kitchen counter with my arms crossed. So, what brings the Reed family reunion tour to Colorado? Please tell me someone died and left me money, because that's about the only reason I can think of that you'd all show up here together. They exchanged glances, that weird silent communication that families develop where entire conversations happen through eye contact. Finally, Eli cleared his throat. We need to talk to you about some stuff. Financial stuff. Financial stuff. I repeated slowly, tasting the words. Let me guess. Things aren't going great back home. I looked at them more carefully, really seeing them now instead of just reacting to their presence. The worn clothes. The stressed lines. The desperation hanging in the air like cheap cologne. Oh my God, I said, and I started laughing. I couldn't help it. Oh my God, you're broke. You're all broke, aren't you? The silence that followed was its own answer, and honestly, it was the best birthday present I could have asked for. The thing about Schadenfreude is that it's supposed to make you feel guilty, like you're a bad person for taking pleasure in other people's misery. But sitting there in my carefully curated apartment, watching my former family squirm on my IKEA couch, which, by the way, I'd assembled myself without calling anyone for help, a personal milestone, I felt exactly zero guilt. Just this warm, glowing sensation in my chest that I can only describe as vindication, having a party with karma, and I'm the guest of honor. They looked wrecked, not in the fun, we partied too hard way, but in the life has chewed us up and spit us out, way that suggested the universe had finally decided to balance its books. My mom was the first to break the silence, because Martha Reed did not do uncomfortable quiet. She cleared her throat with that delicate little sound she made when she was about to say something she didn't want to say, like admitting that the caterer had messed up the hors d'oeuvres or that her favorite reality TV star had been arrested for tax fraud. Noah, sweetheart, she began, and the sweetheart made my eye twitch because she'd never called me that when I actually lived there. We heard through some mutual acquaintances that you're quite successful now. Running operations for a tech company, they said, making quite a good living. Tech repair shop, I corrected because accuracy mattered. And yeah, turns out when you're not constantly being summoned to fix other people's problems for free, you have time to actually be good at your job. Crazy how that works. I grabbed a bottle of water from my fridge, just for me, because I wasn't offering them anything, and took a long sip while they watched like I was drinking liquid gold. But please, continue. This is fascinating. Rachel jumped in, probably because my mom was taking too long to get to the point. Your dad's company went under, she said bluntly, and wow, direct Rachel was new and unsettling. About 18 months ago, the bankruptcy was bad, really bad. I blinked. Richard Reed's company, the one he'd built his entire identity around, the corporate empire that was more important to him than his own children, had crashed and burned? How bad is really bad? I asked, genuinely curious now. Like, had to sell the boat bad? Or living in a cardboard box bad? They lost the house, Eli said quietly, not meeting my eyes. And the cars. And pretty much everything except mom's jewelry, which she's been slowly selling to cover basic expenses. The house. The 4-bedroom colonial in the nice neighborhood with the professionally landscaped yard that I'd mowed for free every summer. The house where I'd grown up feeling like a live-in employee rather than a son. Gone. I tried to feel something about that. Sadness, maybe, or nostalgia for childhood memories. But all I felt was a weird sense of detachment, like they were telling me about strangers. Huh, I said. That's unfortunate. So where are you living now? With Patricia and Bob, my mom admitted, and the shame in her voice was almost palpable. Patricia and Bob were the neighbors she'd spent 20 years competing with, the ones she'd tried to outdo with bigger Christmas decorations and more expensive cars and louder bragging about her children's accomplishments, back when she thought her children had accomplishments worth bragging about. Living with them must have been absolute torture for her ego. They've been very generous, but it's temporary. Patricia's been generous? I said, unable to keep the disbelief out of my voice. Patricia, I called the HOA on you for having your trash cans visible for 6 extra hours, Patricia. That's gotta sting. My mom's face tightened, but she pushed on. Your father is trying to start over, but at his age, and with the bankruptcy on his record. She trailed off, which was Martha Reed code for, it's not going well, and I don't want to say it out loud. And you? I turned to Eli, whose whole vibe screamed, please don't ask me specifics. Let me guess. Those investments you were always bragging about tanked. Crypto, he mumbled, like it was a confession at a church. And some NFTs that turned out to be, worthless. I had to physically bite my tongue to keep from laughing, because of course Eli had dumped money into crypto and NFTs. Of course he had. That was so perfectly on brand for someone who'd spent his entire life looking for get-rich-quick schemes instead of doing actual work. Let me guess, I said. You bought in at the peak, didn't you? Right when everyone and their grandma was talking about how Bitcoin was going to the moon. Can we not do this? Eli snapped, finally showing some emotion beyond shame. I know I messed up, okay? I lost everything. Everything. I'm living in Patricia and Bob's basement, Noah. Their basement that smells like cat piss and broken dreams. To be fair, I said, that's not just Patricia's basement. That's most basements. I turned my attention to Rachel, who'd been unusually quiet. And you, my dear ex-wife? How's life treating you? She looked up, and for the first time, I saw actual vulnerability in her eyes instead of the carefully crafted image she usually projected. I lost my job 2 years ago, she said softly. Marketing position got eliminated during downsizing. I've been freelancing, but it's not steady. And without your income, I couldn't afford the house, so I had to sell it. At a loss, because the market was bad. I'm renting a studio now. 1 room, Noah. 1 room with a hot plate and a bathroom I share with the roaches. There was a time when hearing that Rachel was struggling would have destroyed me, would have made me want to swoop in and fix everything like I always had. But that Noah was dead, buried somewhere between Denver and the life I'd left behind. This Noah just nodded and said, that does sound rough. Have you tried not spending $300 on brunch? Her face flushed. That's not fair. Neither was forgetting my birthday to go party with my family. But here we are, 3 years later, finally having this conversation. The room went silent again, and I could practically hear them recalibrating their approach. This wasn't going how they'd planned. They'd probably expected me to be the same old Noah, ready to jump at the chance to be needed again, eager to sacrifice myself on the altar of family obligation. But that Noah had left the building, and in his place was this newer, shinier version who'd learned to say no and mean it. Finally, my mom played her trump card. Your father's sick, Noah. His heart, the stress from everything, the bankruptcy, losing the business he built. It's taken a toll. He needs medication, ongoing treatment, and we don't have the money. Her voice cracked, and I couldn't tell if it was genuine emotion or decades of practice at manipulation. Probably both. That's terrible, I said, and I meant it, sort of. I didn't want my dad to die or anything, but I also wasn't about to light myself on fire to keep him warm. Have you looked into Medicaid? There are programs for people in financial hardship. I could send you some links if you'd like. Noah, please, Rachel said. Standing up like physical height would make her more persuasive. We're not asking for much. Just some help to get back on our feet. You're doing so well, and we're family. Family. I interrupted, and the word came out sharp enough to cut. That's interesting. See,